Seven on Sunday's podcast is intended for mature audiences. Episodes discuss sensitive and fraught topics that many teens and 20-somethings face, but may be triggering. The content may not be suitable for all audience members. Please take caution when listening.
This is not any place you ever expect to be as a parent. And when we first lost Charlie in July 2022, it's all the things that you expect, life-changing, mind-bending. So just the act of saying, of putting in Charlie's obituary, he died by suicide, that's a revolutionary act. If you are not completely honest about the nature of the biggest thing in your life, how can you heal?
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, listeners. This is Stephanie, your host, joined by Dr. Chez, your co-host. And today we are talking to Betsy Stephenson. Just a little forewarning, this is a very emotional and important interview with a mom who lost her son to suicide. And we are so grateful for her insight and honesty and raw testimony to the experience of family going through the loss due to suicide. We will be doing this in two parts. It was a great interview, and we just wanted to give it as much space and time as needed. So welcome to part one.
Today, we are joined by Betsy Stephenson, who is somebody that I met through our children, and our children went to the same school together. And unfortunately, her son, Charlie, passed away from a death of despair. Otherwise, we might say suicide, but I like the words death of despair because that really describes what his passing was. And the more that we can understand this phenomenon, which has become a very much an epidemic phenomenon, I lost a brother, maybe two brothers to this death of despair. I would say two, but one definitely. This is an epidemic, so it's only increasing. So the more that we can understand this, call it what it is. And Betsy, your book is absolutely phenomenal. I say that with such gratitude for your heartfelt words. I read it in two sittings. I could not stop reading it. Literally could not stop. And your book is called Blackbird by Betsy Stephenson. It's about her journey as a mother in this situation. And it is raw, real as I've ever heard. And I've heard a lot of clients. And this is the real deal of your experience. And I so appreciate you having the courage to share that with us. It's not out yet. It's in pre-order, but we will put it in the show notes. But it is going to help a lot of people. So yes, I'm already crying. That will happen. I'll mute myself so nobody hears me sniffing. But Betsy, thank you so much because this is a topic near and dear to my heart and a topic that, we have to really do something about this. So I thank you for what you're doing about this tough topic. Thank you so much for joining us. And wherever you want to jump in and share with the audience, that's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. This is not any place you ever expect to be as a parent. When we first lost Charlie in July 2022, it's all the things that you expect, life-changing, mind-bending. Writing helped me get through it myself. And what I learned really quickly, because I was just writing for myself and then I started sharing a little on social media, I was really surprised by the response. That gave me fuel as I was in deep grief and delusionment and just confusion. Hearing how others responded to our story and what we were going through. And what I realized is, and our whole family realized this, is that These things are so hard to talk about, and people don't talk about them. So just the act of saying, of putting in Charlie's obituary, he died by suicide, that's a revolutionary act. Most people don't do that. Some go to great lengths to hide cause of death. And I certainly, one thing you learn really fast as a grieving parent, you do not judge any other grieving parent's choices or behavior or actions or inactions. It is such a deeply personal thing. So there's no one right way to do it, but we sat down as a family when we first were back under the same roof, my husband and my two daughters and I, and we said, how are we going to present this? Are we going to be honest? The answer was quick and, universal. We are going to be honest. We are going to say what happened, because having secrets or even being a little vague about the biggest thing in your life. This is the biggest thing in my life. This is the biggest, most monumental thing that has happened to me, my husband, and their sisters. And if you are not completely honest about the nature of the biggest thing in your life, how can you heal, right? How can you try and make sense of your new world? So we were like, okay, we're going to be upfront about it. And what it did was it opened doors, I think, for our community to support us. So we actually ended up reaping the benefit of being open, because it made us more approachable. It made us easier to support. So many people shared, sometimes very discreetly, sometimes directly. They would ask, can I come over and talk to you? Yes, that's a form of support. And also, look, I don't really tell anybody this, but my brother died this way 20 years ago, or my grandfather died this way, and I know my mother has never been the same. These are people that we might have known for years. Finding the human connection. Unfortunately, suicide is on the rise. And I think with our children in particular, young people, it's really scary. And so if we think about how, as a parent, we didn't want anybody else to experience what we were going through, is there anything we can do? And this is just a small thing we can do, which is try and take the mystery out of it. Because Charlie, to say that he was not a candidate for this is an understatement. He had loads of friends. He was very outgoing. He did well in whatever he accomplished or, sought to do. Our family adores him. Frankly, he had a life of privilege with travel and experiences, and he was studying what he wanted, where he wanted, pursuing the things that propelled him, and no one had any idea he was struggling the way he was. And we certainly didn't think he would do this.
Yes, that is so important to point out. Charlie's what my family would call a sparkler. He was like a sparkler, like lit up the room kind of person. And I knew him very little. I was at the Woodbury game, by the way, when he was really sparkling. I just want to say that. But anyway, he was a sparkler. And my daughter, who went to school with him, and I think a lot of those kids had no idea and kind of thought this is the last person that they would think would be in a situation that desperate or that sense of despair. So I thank you for saying that, because that's really important, because we think we know, we think, oh yeah, it's the kid that looks depressed, but oftentimes it's not at all.
On that, if Charlie is like the last person, the last candidate, I think there's probably parents listening to this or young people who say, like, well, then how do I know? What do I say? How would you say there's something that was underlying that you didn't know about? Or would you say there were signs in retrospect that maybe would help people? You know what I mean? So that people don't feel like, oh my gosh, this is a big deal and it does happen way too frequently. How does one check in on their child?
You have just put forth my parenting conundrum in a nutshell. You know, all the soul searching, and I'm a voracious reader, and I've talked to mental health professionals, and I've got questions and I'm seeking answers. And where I land on this is a couple places. One is you can only work with the information that people give you. And Charlie was not giving us information. We were trying very hard to extract that information from him, but he was not forthcoming and he often lied. I asked him point blank, "Are you thinking of killing yourself?" And he said no. And I look back now and I see that he was.
So was there something he was struggling with? So he was sparkly. Did he struggle with his mental health? Did you know at least that much? Is that why you felt the need to even ask him that? Because I would never even ask my son that.
We had no idea. He was at college in Texas and lived in a group house with a bunch of guys in his fraternity, dating a great girl, doing well in school. Like, his grades were fantastic. We were in regular touch with him. Everything's fine. And we get a call from one of his friends on a Saturday afternoon, which is unusual. They're college kids. They're 21. Why are you calling your friend's parents? And said, "I just feel like I need to tell you that Charlie was saying some scary things last night. He was talking about hurting himself." I was shocked. I was shocked. And there were some other things going on in our house, in our family. My mother-in-law was succumbing to dementia. My husband was in the hospital about to get really serious back surgery. A lot going on. So it was like, wait a minute, I don't know what to do with this, but it is serious. So I dropped everything. I didn't tell him I was coming, but I got his sisters to get on the phone with him and just talk to him. Didn't tell him anything that was going on. Just, "Hey, Charlie, what's up?" Sisterly stuff. They also contacted one of his roommates and said, "Can you just keep an eye on him? My mom's on her way." And they're like, "Yeah," and went to dinner. And I flew basically overnight to get to Texas. And I was, and when I took off, I said, "I'll be there in the morning." He said, "Don't come, I'm fine." And I said, "No, I'm coming. I just need to lay eyes on you. You know, I want to be there." And so I get there and he meets me at a hotel right on campus across from where he lives at, 7:30 in the morning. And he looked wrung out. He was very thin. His eyes were sunken. His skin was peaked. You could tell he was not well. And so we went to my room and he slept in the bed and I slept on the sofa, and he slept for hours. And he woke up and I I curled up next to him. Moms don't get to do that with their boys that often. He's almost 6'2" and 21 years old. He wasn't used to his mother wrapping her arms around him. But I just held him and he cried. And I asked him, why he was crying. I said, what's going on in your mind? What is the emotion you're feeling? And he said, fear. And I said, what are you afraid of? And he said, I'm just afraid. And I asked him, he said he'd been having a hard time. And I asked him to tell me about it. I said, have you had suicidal thoughts? Have you had thoughts of hurting yourself? And he said, no. I asked him that directly because I had learned, being a reader and a student of mental health and, having these kids in the house, that there's nothing wrong about saying the word suicide. And that, in fact, it can really open up someone's eyes to the severity of the situation. And it can foster a productive conversation. So it was very hard for me to say, but I knew I had to say it. He lied to me. And this is not a kid who lies. This is not a manipulator. He never was trying to get out of stuff. You have 3 kids and you kind of know how what they're all prone to, right? They all have their little tricks, and certainly Charlie had his. But he was just a straight shooter. So I believed him. I believed that he was in distress, and I believed that he needed help, but I did not believe he was suicidal because he told me he was not. A couple of hours later, he took a call from an on-campus counselor. It turns out before I arrived, he had called the helpline for his university. If you need help, call this number. And I learned, he got on the phone, he's having this conversation, and I said, do you want me to leave the room? And he said no. So I listened to him talking to this counselor. He had called them in a state of emergency the night before. They had determined that he was not at immediate risk, but that he needed a follow-up. And as he's talking through this follow-up conversation, I learned that he had been seeing a therapist for 6 months. And I had no idea. He hadn't told me or his father or his sisters. So going back a semester, the beginning of his junior year of college, he was feeling unmotivated. That's what he said. I'm just unmotivated. It's hard to get anything done, and I'm sluggish. I need help. He put himself in therapy on campus, free, all semester. And I learned this while he's talking to the crisis line. But I thought all this was a good thing. I thought this was a good sign. Like, my gosh, he's struggling. He knows he needs help. He's reached out for help in this really dark moment. Isn't that what you want? I always thought that's what you would want. If you're trying to take care of someone that you're trying to protect from, the worst. So I spent a week there with him, and I don't know how he did it, but he went to class. He would go to class and he would come back to the hotel. He would go across the street to his house, take a shower, hang out with his buddies, and then come back to the hotel. Tried to get him to eat, tried to talk to him, but really was trying to mostly listen. He didn't offer much easily. And I shared with him my perspective about my struggles with depression, tried to normalize it, talked about my experience with different therapists over the years, how medication has worked for me. And he engaged in all those conversations. He did not stonewall, he did not downplay it, but he didn't offer a lot. And he lined up a new therapist while I was there. And I was like, okay. And at some point he said, I need to get back to living like a normal college student, which means I don't need my mother across the street from me. And so I said, you're right. And I said, but we're going to keep talking about this. Okay. That's the deal. That's the whole, if you're feeling vulnerable, the only way we can be here for you is if we can have open conversations. And he said, okay. And I said, so I'm going to ask you from time to time how you're doing. What's your mood? And you have to promise me you're going to be honest. And he said, I will. And I'm going to ask you, how's therapy going? You don't have to tell me what are you talking about, what's in every session. But I just need to know, are you getting along with your therapist? Do you think it's helping you? Do you need more? Do you need less? He said, I promise. And I said, and you need to promise me that if you feel like you're going to hurt yourself, you will ask for help. You've done it before. Do it again. I promise. I would never do that. And I think it hurt, anything permanent. And I think I even said that funny, turned it into a joke thing, Charlie, if you kill yourself, I'll kill you, kind of the mom thing. So I thought he was doing everything he needed to. We saw him a few times. That was in April. We saw him twice in May. He came home. We met in Baton Rouge for his sister's graduation. And then he came back to Alexandria in June. He definitely was still struggling. You could see he was, he's had trouble eating. He couldn't eat. He would rest a lot, but he was also doing things. He was going to hockey games with his friends. He went to a reunion at his high school. He went out with friends. He certainly hung out with us. And he went home after a long weekend here. And 3 weeks later, he killed himself. And I had talked to him 2 days before. I texted him the night before. His sisters and father, and we'd all been in touch with him.
It sounds to me like you did everything I would have done, everything, like even looking at it from this perspective. And then the only thing that comes to me, and we don't have to keep this on, you don't have to answer this question or anything. The only thing I feel like, because I would feel like I did everything if I were you. The only thing I can think as I sit here is, was there something underneath that was missed because it was a secret? It was the girlfriend and he were having issues. He struggled with drugs. Like, was there anything, like, I'm sure you went through those and we don't need to talk about it, but I'm like, that is the only thing I think, because it sounds to me like you had an understanding and I would have felt exactly like you. I would have done exactly what you're doing.
I mean, of course, there's always more you can do, but I actually have a very dear friend that is a child psychologist who has 4 children of her own. And one of her children was really good friends with Charlie. They were in the same grade and they grew up together. And she's my, women have their walking buddies, right? She's my walking buddy. And so she's known Charlie most of his life. And when all this was happening, when I was in Fort Worth and when I came back from Fort Worth, after, he sort of had his distress call. And while we were watching him, I was in very close touch with her because she's my friend, but also she's an expert. And she was good at giving me guidance and reinforcement and whatever. But yeah, I felt pretty good about how we were approaching it and what we were doing to support him. She also knew him. So she knew his personality. He's not an impulsive guy. He's actually very cautious. He really cared about what, making other people uncomfortable. He wanted to support people. The night before he died, and this is in the book, He went out with a bunch of friends. They went to dinner. They went to bars. They're all in college. It's summertime. And then a bunch of them ended up at his house, hanging out, talking, playing cards till like 3 o'clock in the morning. And one of the people who was there is somebody he'd known from high school. So he'd known many years. And she was having some stress about some, girl drama or whatever. And it's late night and they're talking. And he said, whatever you're feeling right now, because she was really anxious, whatever you're feeling right now, it's going to pass. It's not going to stick with you. You're going to feel better. And then he said, and if you're really stressed and you're really having a hard time, maybe you should have your mother come and spend some time with you. My mom came to see me and it helped me so much. And then he said, no matter what happens, you can always call on me. I'm right across the street. We've been friends a long time. You can always call on me. And he killed himself within hours. What do you do? I mean, we play the game. We're like, what if we called him? What if his roommates, these wonderful, kind, just stellar young men who were his friends, were there, and they wonder what would have happened if they'd knocked on the door. But it was a Sunday and they'd gone out till 3 o'clock in the morning the night before and they were hungover. Who's going to wake up somebody and say, hey, I hadn't seen you this morning, right? I mean, college kids stay in their rooms, for 24 hours at a time. And so they have to live with this. And this is one thing I would say, there's a lot of focus when someone is in distress like this. There's a lot of focus on reasons to live. And of course, we should all remember the reasons to live. I've gotten really familiar with the reasons to live since I've lost my son. I have to focus on that. And it's my husband and my daughters. But when someone is in that acute state, or if they're contemplating this, they're contemplating killing themselves, what they don't need, I don't think, not a clinician, is a reason to live. I think particularly kids need to know the hard facts about what happens when you die. So what happens when you die is your roommate finds your body. Your house is turned into a crime scene. Your parents go through and clean out everything in your room, every pocket, every drawer, every piece of your backpack, every notebook. Charlie lived a really clean life, considering he was a college kid. There's no way. Would you have wanted anybody to be your parents to be going through your stuff? And I'm not just saying going through your stuff. I mean, we're looking under mattresses. We're combing the corners, looking for answers. If that's not motivation enough to not kill yourself, if you're 21 years old, not to mention the people you love the most for the rest of their lives, the people you love the most will blame themselves for what you did.
Yeah.
They will all wonder. And even people who are on the outer edges of, say, your friend group or your social circle will say, well, I wonder if I had just talked to him a little bit more, or invited him to that, or asked different questions when we were talking, or didn't talk so much about myself. Every single person that you've ever cared about will not only miss you, but they will feel like they played a part and your death. That's what I think young people who are suicidal need to know.
I'm really happy you're saying that because I think there are some people that need that jolt of reality, you know? The other side of the coin is that from my experience and learning, it's this perfect storm of despair that is really hard to there is no rationalization with the depressed brain. Like it is a brain disease. So to rationalize it and those kind of thoughts, of course, I've heard those from
Mm.
people, like, of course, they go through those thoughts, but it's really hard. So that's where prevention, the only thing that I've found that works with prevention is you have to have a list a mile long, maybe, 25 things that you are going to do and go through that list before you take the ultimate, exit to a temporary problem. It's a permanent solution. It's not a solution, but it's a permanent answer to a temporary problem. But we need to give kids this list of all these things that they can do, middle of the night things, because it
Yeah.
doesn't come in the day. It doesn't come when you can go for a walk and get fresh air or, have a little dance party in your room or whatever. It usually is 3, 4 AM, 5, whatever it would be. If that's the case, and I don't know, like, if he was taking medication, because if you're drinking and you're on medication
Mm.
and combining things, then that gets people down a rabbit hole really quickly too. So there's like this perfect storm of stuff that we don't know, and I saw you nod that he wasn't on medication, so that wasn't the factor, but it ends up being this perfect storm. And I've thought that about my own brother. I was like, well, if this, and this didn't happen, would this have still happened? And my feeling is if he didn't have the route to get out of depression, and he tried too, if he didn't have the way to get out of the depression, and then these perfect storm situations came into play, then it could have happened a week later too. So we need to really make sure that the prevention efforts are really strong in therapy, outside of therapy, with people. We need to educate fraternities on this stuff. Kids don't know what to do, and sororities, like, kids don't know what this looks like, what to do. And Charlie definitely didn't fit the image until, God bless his friend that called you. Like, that's huge that they had your number and called you. I'm like, oh, standing ovation on that one.
He was surrounded by great people.
Great people.
These are true friends who looked after each other. He looked after them, they looked after him.
It's not a rational thing.
It
And
is
he
not.
needed medication to get his brain, but he wasn't there yet. I don't know if you know what the therapist diagnosed him with or where that was in the process, but it's really important to get a really good diagnosis to know, what is my brain disease? What is happening? And it's temporary. Like, it might not be forever, but we go through these shifts for different reasons. And so the most important thing is a really good diagnosis. I'm here to say that sometimes the college counseling centers, God bless them, they're wonderful. Sometimes it might be an intern. And so if you're that serious that you are contemplating taking your life, no, we're not going to do an intern right now.
Mhm.
We're going to go get a medical diagnosis and get this figured out. Exactly, whatever it is. Find the best person you can, which is usually by word of mouth, and that may be at the counseling center, but that is crucial. And to involve the parents on it. You need a team, because doing this alone is dangerous and hard territory. But a team to say, hey, just like you said when we did our pre-interview, you were like, if you had cancer, we're going to get the best doctors, we're going to find the team, we're going to consult with everybody. This is the same exact thing. You want a team of support people. You want a team of people to say, is this the right therapy, or should we do this, or let's look at all options. Yes.
No, I was
What do
just
you
gonna say,
want to
Betsy,
say
I
to that?
think that's actually really important. You did say that, but you said it in a different context, and I think the way you said it was so important. You said a lot of times a parent is like, "Oh, can you just I know you're struggling, but can you just push through for 3 more weeks till the end of the semester, which is like a parent's instinct. Like, okay, listen, let's just get through. Like, that's how we deal with things. We've made it this far in life. We'll push through. But that is not what you would say if someone said, I'm diagnosed with stage 4 cancer right now. You wouldn't be like, oh, push through for 3 weeks. And I think, Chez, to your point, is that's what we're talking about. When it's severe, when you are, and Chez, I don't know where that falls on the like alarm bell list when a psychologist hears that, but I believe if you are talking about suicidality or suicide, or if you have made plans to harm yourself, those are two, like, they are stage 4 cancer.
Yes, that is stage 4, huge. And I want to say this. If a friend hears about it, and people don't know this, Betsy, I didn't know this and I'm trained in it until I knew about it. But if your friends in your circle know about it and you are a private person, then it has been thought about many, 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 many times privately, like many. So that is when the alarm bells are definitely, but we don't know that. And we trust our gut, and we trust our loved ones, and we trust that things are going to be okay because we want them to be okay. The problem today is it's pretty easy. Like, access to all kinds of ways is pretty easy. Access to getting really down low is pretty easy these days. It's not just depression anymore. It's depression on top of 5 other things usually. So it's that's the problem. So that's where, yes, the stage 4 alarm bells have to come into play. And it's hard when it's a person that is so sparkly and doesn't seem that. And he knows that, like, knows that that's his role in life, is to be the shoulder for people to be on. Like, that probably did help him to help his friend that night. That was probably really a beautiful, life-giving moment for him, to help a good friend and to feel like, wow, okay, I'm helping somebody. Because I think that wasn't unusual. The little bit I know about him, I think that wasn't unusual. And my brother was the exact same way. We have to watch out for those guys because they don't, you said this in your book, they don't want to receive help. They don't want to get it back. It's harder for them to do that. And that's not something that you could have just taught. I know you talked about that in the book, like, how could I have taught him to receive more? And I don't know if you can or can't. But anyway, let's hear
I
your thoughts.
know you are completely right. I mean, I do think going through and replaying every moment of his life, there was just some innate personality and sort of demeanor with him. Ironically, there are things that we often deem positive, you know? He's unselfish. He's patient with others. He doesn't hug the spotlight. He gives freely of himself and asks little of others. These are things that we value. We certainly value them in our family, but also just culturally, those are admirable. That was who he was, but it's almost like it was too much of who he was. And you would never think that. You would never, as a parent, say, you need to be a little more selfish, And
Right. Like,
so,
could you be an asshole for once?
yeah, please,
Yeah, please.
distract me with all your wants and needs. So I think those are not bad things, and they are not a precursor to suicidal thoughts or depression. But if you have depression, and if you are not used to asking for help or expecting help, even though we would have done anything for him. I mean, I flew overnight, right? I'll get there as soon as I can. That's a bad combination. There's also, I think, probably more for young men. I hate to generalize, but, you know, he wanted to be self-sufficient. He wanted to take care of himself. And so, I said earlier, Charlie lied about how he was feeling and what was going through his mind. I want to make clear that I believe that Charlie lied because he really thought he could handle this. He was doing all these things. He was handling it, right? He was. He didn't want to bother us. He didn't want us to worry. We had a lot of things going on in our house at that time. He didn't want to bother us. And so we'd say, 3 weeks before he died, he was here, home. We walked around the yard. I said, okay, gonna have the talk. Tell me about your mood. It's fine. What's your outlook? What do you think about the future? I feel pretty good. I've got a job lined up for the fall. I like the classes I'm taking. Okay. How do you like your therapist? Things are going well. Her office is really close to my office, to my work, so it's real convenient. Great. You get to keep seeing her? Yes. He was handling it. And he really believed he was handling it. So when I say, so Charlie, are you having any thoughts of hurting yourself? He says no. But that's depression. That's how tangled it makes your brain, you know? He was doing it. And then he woke up one morning. We don't know why. We don't believe there was a precipitating event. He was surrounded by people. We've talked to all these people. They're like, you can see our phones. You can see the texts we were exchanging with him. He didn't say anything that alarmed them. But for whatever reason, he felt like he couldn't go on. And it was that tunnel vision. And no, there's no rational thought. I totally agree. No rational thought would have gotten through. We never found his phone. I think, we don't know, but we think that in a fit of rage, he smashed his phone and then he got rid of it because no phone, no, location, no anything after, 3 o'clock in the morning.
Can you get those records? Like, I would feel, I guess, like I would want to know who were the last correspondents with.
You can. It takes a lot. We made a decision early on that it wasn't going to serve us.
Mm-hmm.
And I think everybody in their grief journey has to make the decisions that are going to serve them.
Mm-hmm.
So the information that we have about his final day, night, and hours all has come to us. We've had conversations with the people who are around him, or they have gotten in touch with us. The conversation about the girl that he was sort of comforting the night before he died, that came to us 4 or 5 months after he died.
Mm-hmm.
Because her mother called and said, I just need to tell you this. For me, and this is my view on the world and how I get through life, it happened. I can't undo it. There's nothing that will bring him back. And so I guess I'm curious about the ins and outs of who did he spend the most time with, and was there any drama running in the background, and who did he text, and what did they say, and all that. Of course I'm curious. But it doesn't matter.
We are ending this part of this interview here. Betsy, we both want to say thank you so much for your candor and insight and really measured responses. You really are thoughtful with understanding your own experience and then sharing that with us. Where we ended with you saying, everybody's grief experience is so different. Everybody's grief journey is their own. And you have such honor and respect for that after what you've gone through. I feel the same way, that I have such respect for anyone's grief journey because it is different. And when you said, the phone and all the other investigative things that we may think, oh, wouldn't we want to do this, do that? I think that having that mantra of does this serve me? That's like really essential of thinking what is going to serve me. And I thought about my own situation and I remember people saying to us when my brother Matthew died, people saying, "Aren't you going to sue the university? Aren't you going to sue the kid who handed him the gun? Aren't you going to do they wanted justice?" And my father made the decision that he didn't want to spend a year, 2 years, whatever it would be, in a courtroom getting justice potentially served because he felt like the powers that be, as long as they made new laws that no guns were allowed in the dorms, all that kind of stuff, the powers that be and the people involved have to live with that. So that's justice, and he didn't need to go down that route. So anyway, I feel like it's really a good reminder, Betsy. Thank you for ending with that. The other thing I want to say is that this is what struck me in this part of the interview. When you came to him, you flew overnight, you came to him, he came to your hotel room, you held him, and he cried and cried and cried. What that tells me, and that's not new to me in my work, but what that reminds me of is the fact that boys and men do not have a place to emote. After a certain age, they stop doing that. They stop getting in your arms and bawling. Girls might continue, and we might give girls the excuse of hormones cause their emotional waves. But boys have the same thing. Boys need to emote. And when it doesn't come out in that way, like we said, it may come out in punching walls. It may come out in throwing things. It may come out in aggression against self, all kinds of other things, or masking it with drinking, drugs, whatever. So it dawned on me how important it is and how this doesn't happen. We don't teach people how to handle emotions. And Betsy, you didn't know when you had kind of postpartum stuff, or maybe it was after the kids were, toddlerhood or younger, I mean, older. But, you didn't know how to handle emotion, and none of us do. We're not taught how do you handle intense emotion. So I really want to push this forward of let's teach people how to do that, and young men especially, and let's provide the spaces where they can do that and do that safely. And so you providing that for him was hugely beneficial, I'm sure, to his mental health.
I like that you say that because, people hear the term toxic masculinity, and what they think when they hear toxic masculinity is that it's a condemnation of men, and they have that wrong. What toxic masculinity is a condemnation of a culture that says that you have to live within these certain parameters to be a man. That is what toxic masculinity is, where men believe that they cannot emote, that they cannot be themselves, and that they have to put up this front of being strong, all of these kind of stuff. None of us are always strong, and it's that whole idea that's just been through history that men aren't allowed to have fear. And even the Spartans, I am certain, were fearful on their days of battle. So I think that the word has bad connotations, but it's really important that we recognize what toxic masculinity is and how it's hurting our boys, not how it's hurting culture. It is hurting culture, but how it is specifically harming boys. And I just had three little takeaways going off of what you said, Chez. My dad, when he died, none of us know how we're going to feel in the grieving process. It is unique to all of us. We think, oh, if I had cancer, I would do this. If I had some, I would do this. And none of us can say what we would do until we're in that situation. So I am so grateful that Betsy and her family chose to share that this was death by suicide. I think destigmatizing this is so important. There are so many, too many young people or older people who die by this disease of desperation and despair. That is something that we can throw our arms around as a society to be there for people. And though we may not be able to stop it, we definitely can do more to help when we acknowledge that there is a problem. The first thing is acknowledging that there is a problem. There is a problem with suicide in our culture, and we have to call it out. It is important to have these conversations and to acknowledge these things and to open up the discussion, because that's the way we move forward in the grief process and in culture to, maybe heal some of what we can around diseases of desperation. Really, my last thought was, this is so relatable to too many people. Well, one, grief and loss is very relatable to many. And when we go to college, I know that our audience is young people in high school and college. We have all, if you haven't dealt with it in high school or college, you will sometime thereafter with the loss of grandparents or beloved, teachers or mentors or aunts or uncles in your life. So I'm just very grateful for hearing anyone's story that will, help other people or resonate with other listeners about how to process and walk through a grief journey. So thank you, Betsy.
And I do want to remind everybody that Betsy's book is out. It's called Blackbird, and the subtitle is such a powerful subtitle. Let me read it here. It is A Mother's Reflections on Grief, Loss, and Life After Suicide. And it is a powerful book. I recommend it for anybody that has lost anybody to a death of despair, whether that's suicide or, any kind of drug overdose or anything else. But it's a powerful healing journey that you share with us, Betsy, and I'm really appreciative of that. I also want to say that it's important to note, and I think that this became obvious during this interview, that depression and mental health issues are genetic. There is a nature and a nurture, like they're both in there. So it's really important to note that if you start to see those signs of things, to really get the best help you can. And I'm not saying that Charlie didn't get great help, because it sounds like he did have somebody that was helping him. But when you voice a suicidal thought, when that actually from here comes out here, we have to take that seriously, very, very seriously. It may require hospitalization, which nobody wants, but it may save a life. It does save lives, may require medication, may require all kinds of things to help change the channel. I want to do a PSA that says, change the channel in the mind. That's what is most important, because we have the power to do that. And when we don't have the power, it may take an extra therapist. It may take an extra therapy to help change the channel. It may take medication, may take whatever, but something to change the channel. And a lot of the work that I do is teaching people that we own our minds. Our minds do not own us. But a lot of times we get stuck in this thing of thinking that the mind is in control, and that's not actually true. So we can change the channel. It just means really actively pursuing that. So we're going to talk in the next episode about that particular part of working with these things, and we'll definitely give you more tools on how to do that. So stay tuned next week, and thank you again, Betsy. Thank you for joining us for this episode of 7 on Sundays.
The 7 on Sundays podcast represents the opinions of Dr. Chez Leeby and Stephanie Boye based on our experience. It also shares the stories, behaviors, and opinions of our guests that we do not necessarily condone or view as healthy. 7 on Sundays is an open forum to discuss what is happening with our listening audience. Some names and details of our guest stories have been changed to protect their anonymity. This podcast is not a substitute for mental health treatment. If you are in crisis and in need of mental health support, please call 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. It is free and confidential.
Join the conversation and connect with us through our website, 7onsundays.com. That's the number 7 on Sundays.com. We encourage everyone to do their own research. Thank you, and be well.